full disclosure, so that has started now. So welcome everybody. We're excited to have Corey Hargreaves today from our SISIP office in Esquimalt giving us this presentation. Before he gets started, I'm just going to review the classroom tools so that if he asks you to use any of these tools, you're able to do so. Some of you might already be familiar with these, so we'll just go through them pretty quickly. So starting with your participant panel, and I've popped out pictures of each of these just for easier demonstration purposes, but to the right-hand side of your screen, you have a participant panel that shows all of our names, and they're all listed down along the side. You can see that your headset or phone icon is next to the left of your name. That just shows that you connected either using your computer or your telephone. To the right of your name, there's a mute button. If you click it once, it mutes you. If you click it again, it unmutes you. So it's that little box with a microphone and a line through it. Below that, we have ways that you can communicate with the presenter or myself, the producer, during this session. It's a little icon toolbar with some emoticons, and I popped it out here again for ease of view. So you can each raise your hand by just clicking on the little hand, and if you want to try it while I'm talking, that's great, just to let us know that you see how they're used. So click on it once, it raises your hand. Click on it again, it puts it back down again. To the right of that is the green check and the red X. That's just for answering yes or no questions. So if Corey asks you, have any of you used SISIP Financial Services in your time in the military, you can click on the green check for yes or the red X for no, and that lets him know their response to your question. We won't worry about these two little buttons today, but to the right you'll see the smiley face emoticon with a little drop-down arrow next to it, which gives you some choices on how you can communicate with Corey or myself during the session. You can clap your hands, give us a smile, have a surprise face. If you do step away from the session for a couple of minutes to grab a drink or use the washroom, if you could just put up this little coffee cup emoticon to let us know that you stepped away so that we're not calling on you and we know you're not having technical difficulties. So if you want to give the coffee cup emoticon a try real fast just to make sure you know how to use it, feel free. And then finally, you'll find up in the upper left-hand corner of your screen a toolbar that looks like this. And I've popped it out again for your view. And this little blue arrow that's pointing to the right is the pointer tool you're seeing me click around on the screen with. If you all clicked on your particular arrow and clicked into the screen, you would see your arrow show up anywhere on the screen where you click. This is a text tool where if you click on it and then click onto the screen, again, you're going to see your text show up on the screen. And then we've got some other encasing tools, line tools, arrow tools, marker tool, and then an eraser tool. I don't know how much of these we'd actually use today, but I just wanted to let you know that they're there in case you do want to use them. And Corey, you might see using his pointer tool to point at his presentation, or line tools or highlighter tools. But he might ask you to use your pointer tool to, point at something on the screen to answer a question. So if everybody just quickly wants to find that toolbar and click on their pointer tool, just because I want to make sure you all know where that is. So go ahead and just click on the pointer tool and then click anywhere in the screen. And if you don't know what I'm talking about or are a little bit confused, raise your hand with the little hand raised emoticon. All right, use your green check and let me know if you now all feel like you could use these quick little tools if need be during the session. And a red X if not. Kim, you good with those basic little tools? Kim Miller? All right, I'm just going to assume she stepped away. All right, so if everybody's good to go, let's move on to Corey. So go ahead, Corey, take it away.
Right. Well, thanks for having me here today, and I appreciate everybody logging in. So basically, what we're going to get into today, we're going to talk a little bit about budgeting, and really it's going to be a basic ways to set up a budget, kind of create a budget, the benefits of following a budget. Who here kind of follows a budget or has a budget themselves? Good, good. So we're also going to cover some tips and resources that you might be able to use based on your particular goals. And really the main thing to remember is that everyone's situation is unique. So not everything here might be applicable to every person here. So just take it for what it is. And, you know, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, I'll try and make it as interactive as I can. But if there's any questions, just feel free to ask it as we're moving along here. You don't have to wait till the end or anything like that. So we'll get right into it here. So a little bit about SISIP. Is everybody familiar with SISIP and the services offered? Okay, good. So I'm not going to get into too much about all the services. I'll briefly touch on them, and at the end, I'll talk a little bit about the counseling service. So SISIP, there's the life and disability insurance. They also offer financial planning. The planning is really investments and your retirement release planning. Financial counseling, I'm a financial counselor, so I handle that. It's budgeting, managing money, any sort of distress situation, emergencies, also access to loans and grants, and financial education. So what that comes down to is a lot of the resources that we have available to you guys. So let's first talk about some causes of potential financial problems. So these are all things that could cause people to have some difficulties or be in a difficult situation. You know, needs versus wants, easy access to money. That includes credits, and you know, especially right now with low borrowing rates, it can be easy to take on more debt than you might be able to handle. So something to be conscious of. You know, sales strategy too gets people spending or signing up for department store cards. Rational versus irrational financial decisions. That's kind of an emotional thing. Unforeseen circumstances. You can't always prepare or predict things that are going to happen. So definitely unforeseen circumstances can be a huge cause for financial problems. The best way to mitigate that is, of course, an emergency fund, right? Not paying yourself first. You know, that's where having an emergency fund will assist for those unforeseen circumstances. So, if you're finding yourself in maybe a tight situation, or you kind of realize that, hey, you know, things are getting more expensive, but my paychecks are staying the same. It's pretty common. So what do? First thing is do something about it. Act quickly, right? Don't wait. Create a budget. And boost your income or reduce expenses. Basically, a lot of the time it comes down to make more money or spend less. It's not realistic or feasible for everybody or in each situation to actually make more money, especially in the military. You know, it's not a commission-based job. You have a family. It's just not realistic for you to make any more money. So it comes down to making some adjustments, reducing expenses. And we'll get into some tips that you guys might be able to use there. You know, get your debts under control. That's a big thing, right? Debts can spiral, and interest rates, it just ends up costing you a lot more in the long run. And use resources and benefits that are available to you. There's a lot of resources and benefits out there that I'm sure at the end of it, you're probably going to be surprised at some of the things that are available to you. So what does a budget do? Obviously, it allows you to kind of keep your finances organized, track and set realistic goals. Also keeps you on track to build your credit carefully, right? You don't want to take on too much debt. Like I stated earlier, all of a sudden one day if something happens, you might not be able to maintain that debt, and you're going to be in a tough situation. And it also helps to eliminate or reduce impulse purchases. Shouldn't really think of a budget as a restriction. Think of it more of a plan for the month of how you're going to spend your money. And also, too, the more you know, right, it'll help you broaden your knowledge, too, and take advantage of those tax incentives and tax breaks, depending on where you're at. And, based on your goals, it sets out, helps you put your plan into action. So, what do you need? Well, basically what you need are your revenue and expenses. So revenue, that's what comes in, your income. So you need your pay statements, and if you have any other sources of income, investments, things like that, you want those statements. On the expenses side, bills, bank statements, and any sort of loan statements, lines of credit, mortgage, things like that. So, basics of budgeting. So we're just going to discuss how to calculate your net income, how to itemize your expenses, how to develop a budget plan, how to track your expenses, and then evaluate and obviously reevaluate your budget. Budgets are sort of a living document, so to speak. You have to adjust them as required and as needed, right? So I think this is fairly accurate for today's standards on typically where a family's money goes, right? A lot goes to taxes, but food, clothing, and shelter, that's a big slice of the pie. And then as you can see here, transportation, that's kind of a big one there. Not too much in savings, but that's a pretty typical family budget on where the money's going. All right, how to figure out your net income. I mean, figuring out your net income is not overly complicated. Like, it doesn't have to be this complicated. Basically, you just need to know how much net you bring in each month. Being in the military, though, it is a very good idea to take a look at the pay guides or your pay stubs, because there's a lot of allowances, there's a lot of deductions that come off. So it's a very good idea to know what these deductions are, how much they are. And for the allowances side, postings, things like that, those can change depending on where you're at, right? So it's a good idea you know exactly what you're getting paid. But for a basic budget, I mean, you don't need to do all this, right? I would just kind of figure out your net income, what you get paid each month. You can just go ahead and do that.
Corey, I have a quick question, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for families, military families, with those service allowances, they sort of come and go depending on the situation that you're in. How do you work that into a budget in such a way that you're not counting on allowances that, a year from now you won't have? Any recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, I know for, at least in Esquimalt, the PLD here, we try to, it's used to offset, certain allowances are used to offset housing costs, right? But when we're looking at the budget and helping people out, we always, I mean, a lot of the time it's not realistic to take the allowance completely out, but you try to budget without using it as best as possible. So kind of act as if you don't get it or save some of it, kind of. But I know a lot of the time people's finances are stretched, so they have to budget it with it. But we try to do our best to not include the PLD for the budgeting, because they always say it could go away, it could change, things like that. So act as if you don't get it. A lot of the time that's not going to be realistic, though, because it is quite expensive in certain areas. And you also got to take into account too that allowances, if you're posted, it's typically the allowances are based off cost of living, right? That's what we kind of do is act as if we take it kind of out of the equation and take a look at the finances then. That sort of answer your question?
It does, thank you.
All right, next step is to itemize your expenses. So there's fixed and variable expenses. Obviously, fixed expenses, they're going to be the same each month, right? Savings, debt repayments, your insurance costs, housing costs like rent. I don't know if anybody can think of any other fixed expenses. Go ahead and type it into the chat there. And then you got your variable expenses. These amounts can vary each month. That's your food costs, clothing, recreation, transportation, things of that nature. Yeah, that's another one, private school and childcare. Childcare is a huge cost. So this is, it's pretty in-depth again, but this is sort of a sheet or breakdown on how you can break down where your money's going. It covers your rent and mortgage, condo fees if applicable, property taxes, hydro, water, heating, et cetera, et cetera. And again, when you're doing a budget, you don't have to be this specific, but I personally like it because it makes you think of maybe some expenses or costs that you really didn't think about before, right? Where's your money going? Because that's a huge, huge thing. So this is a pretty thorough. I personally like it. And this is really just an example on what you could use. A lot of people, bank charges, for example, a lot of people don't even think about the bank charges, but I see in my line of work, I see some people end up paying $50 to $70 of bank charges each month. Their bank fee, and then if they're taking out a lot of cash, they don't realize that, if they're taking out cash not from their bank, they get dinged with a fee from that bank, plus their bank charges them. So sometimes people are paying $3 to $4 just to take out some cash, right? So you got to remember the little things always add up, right? If you can save yourself a few bucks a day just on one item or one category, that equals up to $100 a month, right? And if you do that on a couple categories, you're looking at a couple $100, right? And another thing to consider is things such as gifts or clothing. You may not purchase it every month, but say, for example, every 3 months, you're buying $200 or $300 for clothing. You still probably want to put it in your budget to budget for $100 a month. That way, in 3 months, you know that you have money earmarked for clothing or for gifts, and your budget's not going to be out of whack in 3 months because all of a sudden you're buying $300 worth of something. So account for it and budget for it, like those, or annual, like your property taxes, annual expenses, right? You just calculate it, divide it by 12 to give your monthly expense. Just helps keep things organized and sort of balanced too. And the last page is recording your debts, right? Who you owe money to, how much is owed, and what the monthly payment is. And to figure out your availability, you take your net income, basically minus all your monthly expenses, minus your monthly debt payments. And you could use just the minimum payments here to give you a good idea on what you have actual disposable. And then once you know you're disposable, that leads into how to tackle the debt, so on and so forth, right? So are there any questions so far? Okay. And again, oh, yeah.
Yeah, Corey, I was just wondering, could you send us just a copy of this particular budget that you offer for me to forward to the attendees after the session?
Absolutely. I was just going to say, because I know it's on 4 different slides, you're probably like, well, this doesn't make sense.
Right.
But this is the spreadsheet we use. It's just broken up. So yeah, I can give you. I'll send the spreadsheet out. I like using it because it does the math for you, right?
And it really breaks it down, I think, well.
Yeah. You don't have to worry about the calculations. It's all the formulas are in the spreadsheet. Some people are old school. They like to write it out. That works. You got to pick what works for you.
What works best. And then just Pastor Fogarty just put down in chat, it's just, I don't know if I've seen it at the moment, he's just saying large purchases like food, meat, vehicle insurance payments quarterly instead of monthly, allowing for a little bit of savings depending on the family. So just giving, I know my dad did that too, Pastor Fogarty, like he'd buy like that half slab of beef, for the year, and just different ways to save money that way. So those are great suggestions.
Absolutely, right? Little things add up, and you could save a little bit here and there. It all adds up. You got to think just saving a few bucks a day might only be a few bucks a day, but always look at it, well, how much is that throughout the week, and how much is that throughout the month, and how much is that throughout the year, right? It ends up being thousands of dollars just on small things, right? There's always that example like a coffee a day, right? Times $2, times 7, right? Times it throughout the whole year. Think of it that way. Okay. So with the budget, it really comes down to developing a plan. Needs versus realistic wants. I like Starbucks too. So main thing to remember is have some goals, have a plan, but you got to make sure it's realistic. And again, it's all situational, right? There's no right way or wrong way to do a budget. It's really what works for you. A lot of people, they say, okay, well, you know what? I'm never going to eat out, or I'm never going to get drinking another cup of coffee out, right? Well, okay, that's good, but is it really realistic for you to say that, or can you just plan it and work it into your budget and account for that, right? If you allot money towards that and it works in your budget, it's balanced. Nothing wrong with that, right? So you got to pick what works for you and what works for your situation. There's no right or wrong way to do a budget. And a key thing, determine how much to save. The more, the better. But for emergency savings, you want to at least start 5-10% of what you're bringing home, and just start with that, and you can build upon it. So once you kind of have your budget all written out, you think it looks pretty good, what do you do next? Well, record your expenses, obviously, because you need to know where your money's going, right? Perception versus reality. What you think you might be spending on groceries or food might not be accurate. It could be way less, it could be way more. But you can't make any sort of adjustments unless you know where your money's going. And in my line of work, when I meet people, 9 times out of 10, because I will actually add up, do an average of from the last 3 months of bank statements where they're spending their money. 9 times out of 10, they had no idea. They're very surprised. So ideally, you want to do it for 3 months, but, at least do it for 1 full month. I know it's kind of a pain looking at your bank statements, going through, adding everything up. Do it every week, bi-weekly. There's a great website called mint.com. It'll actually do it for you. It'll actually track and categorize where you're spending your money. Obviously, it's easiest if you're just using one account, right? Keep it simple so you're only have to look at one account. Or if anybody here, if you get cash back or points on your credit card, there's nothing wrong with using your credit card for kind of all your purchases if you're paying it off each month, though, right? It doesn't make sense if you're getting cash back or points. If you're paying interest, it's going to negate the benefit of those points or cash back. So that's another thing to remember, is that if you're using any sort of credit, got to have it paid off each month or it's not worth it. And then obviously, you want to, like I said earlier, the budget, it's sort of an evolving living document, right? Oh, I have a question here.
I'm just reading. What I usually do is I take the amount I expect to need for food, gas, allowance, and put it in an envelope. I keep the envelope on me and try not to spend more, so when I'm at the grocery, I stick more to what we need. Just a thought, and that's from Kim Miller. Thanks for sharing that, Kim. I was just thinking about that myself. I'm like, boy, I just put some money in an envelope and just live out of that envelope.
That's an awesome idea, an awesome way to do it. You can do envelopes or jars. That's a great way to do it. And again, I personally don't, because I'm one of those people, if I have cash, I just kind of like, I'll spend it, or if I use cash, I'll have change, and I'll just throw the change in a drawer, and I never really do anything with it. But that's an excellent way to keep it all organized and planned, is cash, envelopes, or jars. So thanks, Kim.
It looks like Tara might have a comment as well there.
One of the things I did when I first tried to get out of debt when we were younger was I got rid of overdraft, because I found like I was always behind the 8 ball before I got my next pay, and you can never catch up. So I did that, and I do the same thing with the envelopes. People laugh at me, but for me it works awesome, because if I start running out in week 1, I know I got to slow down my spending, or I can hoard it a little bit and I can get something bigger next week. And then, if there's less money in the bank, I can blame my husband and not me.
That's an excellent point, because dipping in the overdraft, because you know what's there, right? Whereas if you have cash in an envelope, it's gone, it's gone. You're going to be a lot more careful with how you spend it. Yeah, so that's an excellent point, Tara. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. So back to kind of evaluating your budget. It's really saying, well, how did it kind of turn out? Or am I on track to meeting my goals? If something happened, would you be able to deal with things? So like, are you running a budget that's so tight, if something happened to your vehicle, is there a little money tucked away for that? And that's where it comes reevaluating it, right? Making adjustments. It takes a good, couple months to get it down pat, right? And get something that's realistic and then feasible going forward. So the initial 30 days is sort of a trial and error. So what are some of the advantages of sticking to a budget? Well, obviously, communication with your partner, knowing where your money's going. Like I stated, if you're finding things are tight, or maybe you just want to save more money, whatever your goals are, you can't make adjustments unless you know where your money's going. Keep in touch with reality, and everything's based on, your goals, whatever your goals are. It'll help you keep motivated towards them. If you're saving up for something or you're paying down debts, if you have a timeline to it, you see your balance going down, or in savings, you see your balance is going up, it'll help you keep motivated, right? Obviously, having peace of mind, take a little of the stress off, avoiding those impulse purchases, and seizing opportunities as they arise. So we're just going to get into talking about some tips, ways maybe you can take advantage of improving your budget, tweaking some things. One is boost your income, right? If you're finding your budget tight, make more money or spend less. Boost your income. So a lot of these won't be feasible for some people, but again, it's something to think about, right? Is it possible to get a second job or find part-time or weekend work? Is it possible for a member of the household to work from home, do daycare, babysitting, any sort of online work? Another thing is sell items you don't need. I'm sure everybody has things floating around that they're just not using anymore. So, unload it. Did you have a question?
I think, Joe, you had your hand raised.
Sorry, I can't see everybody.
It was just the comment on financial conversations within partners and families where, at least in my experience, many people tend to avoid conversations when it comes to financial because they don't understand it or they feel they're embarrassed or don't want to discuss it, where it just stems for the issues that keep cropping up throughout the families.
And that is an excellent point. A lot of, majority of divorces, separations, fights, that all leads back to finances, right? And when two people aren't honest with their financial picture or situation, it's one of those things, right? Financial situations, if things are tough, it doesn't get better in time unless you do something about it, right? Typically, it just gets worse and spirals out of control before it's too late.
And Corey, wouldn't you say that's just one of the benefits for military families, having an organization like SISIP working on our behalf? It's a place that you can come that's confidential and non-judgmental, and they really can help you get things under control and work with you with a plan. Wouldn't you say, Corey?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what a lot of the things we do is we're not really mediators, but it can be, right, for when you're helping a member and their spouse figure out their budget or kind of where their money's going, because that's one of the things we do. You'll have both people sitting in front of you, and a lot of the time it might be easier with talking about it to me rather than directly with their partner. So I find a lot of the time it's pretty successful having that third party in there and reinforcing some of the ideas. So other ways to boost the income. And again, renting a spare room or renting a room to a student, something like that. I know in Victoria, and I'm not sure the location of everybody, I know in Victoria a lot of people, we get a lot of international students, so they'll actually take on a student and, got to cook and things for them, but you can end up ahead. So little things like that. And again, it might not always be feasible. It's kind of dependent on the circumstances, if any of these are realistic. But again, it's something to think about, right? Most people might be able to work from home or find a little bit of online work, right? Or sell some things on eBay, generate a little extra income. It's the same slide twice. Sorry about that. Reduce your expenses. So this comes down to evaluating your family needs, right? Are there subscriptions, memberships, insurance needs, clothing? Is there things that you can adjust or reduce? Utilities, cable. Can you cut back down on the use, or is it feasible just to have the internet, right? Or do you need all those huge cable plans? Eat in more, cook more at home. That's going to be cheaper. Buy in bulk. I believe Joe mentioned this. Buying in bulk, you do it right, or couponing, you can save a lot of money. Start a garden if you can. That's not always realistic for everybody, but growing your own food at home. I know a lot of people that do this, take advantage of it, save some money. Taking public transit or carpooling when necessary. A large part of expense is, your vehicle, maintenance, the fuel, everything like that adds up. Look for cheap and free entertainment. There's a lot of outdoor activities you're able to do, especially with spring and summer coming up. Hopefully, wherever everybody's at, the weather's getting nicer. And again, I'm not sure everybody's location, but I know for us, PSP run a lot of cheap or free activities. So there's always something in people's area. And reduce rental expense. Housing is a huge expense. So if it's feasible, you might have to look at downgrading, where you're living and how much it costs you. Limit access to your credit and using it, right? So again, if you're using multiple credit cards by not paying them off, you got to be aware of that. Getting your debts under control. So I'll give you a little bit about, I should have done this at the beginning, but I'll give you a little bit about my background. I'm from the credit and collection industry, so I'm very familiar with debts and how best to tackle them. And the first thing you want to do is prioritize your debts. If you're kind of in a tough spot, there's going to be debts that are more important than others. Rent, utilities, things like that, right? Consolidate. Sometimes this is an option, is to consolidate your debts with the bank, consolidation loan. It's not always the best option, but something to consider. If you have, a bunch of debts floating around, you have room on lines of credit or credit cards, sometimes it's best to move higher interest debts to lower interest cards or lines of credit. If you got the debt, you got it. If you can move it somewhere where you're going to pay less interest, it makes sense to do it. Talk to your creditors. Often, they'll offer zero interest or low interest balance transfers. They may be willing to lower the interest on your credit cards, things like that. And if you do have some debt, best way to tackle it, use the snowball or power pay method. The website's there, and that'll help you kind of tackle and come up with a plan on what to do with your debt. Because I know a lot of the time with people, when they have some debt, they don't know where to start, right? It's like, well, how do I tackle this? Where do I start paying my higher balance or the higher interest, things like that. That resource will help you get it organized, planned, and it'll actually give you a time frame on when you'll be out of debt. And another tip, using the available resources. SISIP. Our services are accessible and available. Even if there isn't an office close to you, our services are completely available. The MFRC, they have a lot of great resources. There's a lot of online tools and resources, too, that you're able to use. Budgeting gives advice on money management, things like that. Our website has a lot of these resources. And, using your friends and family for support or advice. A lot of people, I meet clients, they give me good advice on what they're doing. I'll use that, right? people always have some good ideas that can be used. Also, too, you know, if you can use friends or family to split expenses, going out together, buying bulk items together. I know some people that go to Costco as a group of friends. You know, they buy a bunch of stuff and they all split it up. Ends up being cheaper, right? Helping out with childcare, and just doing, you know, cheaper, free things together. It's more fun doing things with people. So that kind of wraps up that part of the presentation. So I'll open up for any sort of questions anybody might have or comments, and then I'm just going to do a little recap and talk a little bit specifically about the counseling services.
I'll start, Corey. So, pardon me. How much, again, would you speak to the emergency fund? I know I had always heard you should have, you know, 3 months of your net income, but then I've heard, well, that's not true. You don't need that much. What do you really think is a good sort of solid number to start with for people who are just getting started with budgeting and they want to pay things off, but, you know, you never know what might come up to stop that forward progress?
Great question. It's really like anything. It's very situational. Like this whole presentation, a lot of the stuff, some people, it's kind of irrelevant. Some stuff they're going to be able to use. The emergency fund, it's really based on a couple of factors. You know, being in the military, their jobs are fairly secure. It's not like you can get laid off next week. 2, you want to consider, well, if something happened, how much would you need in the bank to be okay, right? So if you're a homeowner or if your renter is going to kind of change. But typically, I mean, I go with, to start, to have $1,000. That's your goal to start, is have $1,000 built up. Then I think, for the majority of people, I mean, you hear sometimes people say, oh, you need 6 months to a year. Most people's situation, I think rule of thumb would be the 3 months. Just living expenses, right? Which basically comes down to what you need to have tucked away to feel safe or comfortable, that you're going to be okay if something happens. Okay, so another question. So let me just talk a little bit.
I think Carlene does.
Yes.
Carlene, you just have to unmute yourself. Oh, wait, no, I think I muted you. There you go, you're unmuted. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I think we did it at the same time. I know one issue that I think a bunch of people in the States are having is because the dollar changes. So we're being paid technically in Canadian dollars, but then we're getting it into an American account. So our budget seems to, we have issues keeping it on track because we don't always know what's coming in. And before I was used to doing shift work, so I didn't always know my income, but I at least had a base, where we don't even seem to really have that base anymore because the dollar seems to change. So do you have any advice on what to do with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's tough because of the dollar, and if you're an OCAN member, it's tough because you can't predict what,
No.
I mean, right now, especially it's going crazy, right?
Exactly.
Really it comes down to expect the worst, you know, and be as frugal as possible and sort of prepare for, you know, that's where it comes down to, okay, making some cuts and things of that nature, just because you don't know how it's going to end up. And you want to be as prepared as possible. And when I say plan for the worst, I do know I mean, I'm out of the loop in regards to the specifics, but I do know they are aware of the huge fluctuations in the dollar, and that was a priority for them to make sure the adjustments were happening in a more timely manner, because I believe that there weren't adjustments made for a period of time, so it affected a huge amount of people, right?
Yeah, I think things were good for a while, and then it changed drastically, and I think it just wasn't being monitored, and then all of a sudden, because of the change, now they're looking at it again, but I don't know if they actually have a standard of when to adjust things. I'm not sure, or if they're maybe changing that now. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, but for the information that was passed along to me, because I did inquire that it wasn't being adjusted, but going forward they're doing it on a more regular basis. So hopefully it'll even out. But it's one of those things when you can't predict it because it's relying on somebody else. That's when I say, sort of plan for it to be kind of rough and make those, adjustments, and hopefully they're just temporary adjustments. But it's kind of one of those things. So.
And Corey, Joe Fogarty had sort of the same question, but a little bit more specific was, is there any kind of calculation that someone should consider when dealing with those kinds of large, 30% drop in the dollar is pretty big off of an income. And so, but I mean, you could think of that as you can also think inflation or just any of those areas where things sort of, like you said at the beginning, your paycheck stays the same, but other things get more expensive. This is sort of the reverse of that. Everything costs the same, but your paycheck is going down. So would you have any sort of a calculation or something that you could specifically say, well, would people is this underscore that importance of the emergency fund, that you're putting away that little bit of extra each month for these kinds of unforeseen circumstances? And then once you've answered that, Barb, I think it has her hand up next.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, every situation is unique, and as far as sort of calculations, it'd be nice if you had an emergency fund specifically for this, but you can't really predict that much of a drop. So again, that's where coming in, is there any way you can boost your income now? Is there any way to reduce expenses? If it's that big of a drop, making some big decisions might be in order. Like if you're a renter, maybe you have to downgrade. How much are your debts costing you? Can you consolidate, make things cheaper for you, right? It's sort of reevaluating your entire financial picture. And so to answer the question, I wouldn't use really specific calculations because it's very situational and specific. But if you are in a tough spot, I would recommend using our services. That way we can look at specifically your situation and offer kind of tailored advice based on your specific situation, where you're at, what debts you have, things like that nature.
And then Barb?
Hi, it's more of a comment, I guess, just about the conversation about the falling dollar. Having just discovered a little while ago that I should have been getting this post-living allowance, I kind of got involved with checking it out, and there was an adjustment on it. It appears that it was every February that it would be adjusted, and so there was an adjustment that happened on February of this year. But I think one of the things that maybe doesn't happen as much as it should in an outcan posting is when the initial salary and benefits package is sort of put in front of you and you look at all that and it's all wonderful and you're moving away and starting a new life somewhere else, you kind of do start to think that that is in fact your salary, if you will, when really the post-living allowance is meant to make to offset some of these adjustments and foreign service pays are meant to acknowledge, you know, additional costs that might be had when you're out of country. So I think there's a bit of a perspective thing here too, in terms of if looking at a budget, you know, should we be factoring those kinds of things into our regular operating dollars, or should they, or a portion of that be being put into the emergency fund sort of concept right from the beginning, so you don't get used to having that extra money that is actually meant for some of these up and down times.
That's a great point, Barb. Corey, that sort of goes back to that conversation right towards the beginning of when you get these extra allowances. So when you're stationed overseas, or you know, in Canada or in Europe, you're given foreign service posting, and you're giving this post-living allowance, and these are those additional allowances. It's true, I think everybody goes in with the expectation that that is their salary, but those are allowances. And so maybe like you said at the beginning, as much as possible when budgeting, try to take those out of the equation so that you can live off of what your actual salary is, and you have those allowances for that additional padding if the dollar drops, or if gas prices double, or what have you.
Yeah, exactly. I understand too. I mean, it's tough, especially for a lot of people, because the allowances are there for a reason to offset cost of living. But if you can do your best to budget kind of without factoring it in, you're going to be in a kind of best spot possible when things like this happen.
And just Kim has said in the Q&A down there, she says, you know, she agrees the way the outcome was brought to the members was, you know, that you're going to make so much money when you go on this outcan. And for some people, depending on their specific situation, it could hurt them. You know, it ends up being that they don't make more money. And so it's, I think as Barb was saying, you know, just maybe for, and this sort of is outside of SISIP, although if you happen to have somebody, a member in your SISIP office who you know they're going on an outcan, you know, letting them know all of these things, like, hey, really check that, you know, check that what your finances are going to be, right? Because it doesn't always work out that you're making that tons more money because of exchange or because of other issues. So great point, Kim.
Yeah, that's an excellent point too, and you got to factor in too if two people are working, even if it's part-time, you know, if you're shipped off, you know, that other person might not be able to work part-time, right? So you're losing that extra income that you kind of become accustomed to. So, you know, are those allowances going to make that up, right? So a lot of things to think about.
Anybody else have any questions, specific questions, or just any other, you know, looking for some specific advice? If not, I think he's going to talk about the financial counseling.
Yeah, so I'll wrap it up here. So I just wanted to touch again on the counseling service that are available. It's free. It's confidential. We don't use the chain of command at all. And like I stated, you know, before, and I'm just reiterating it, financial situations are, you know, very unique. There's no one solution or one, you know, size fits all. It kind of depends on every person's unique situation, what the best solution is. So I hope today you did get something, or you learned something from this presentation, or at least you found some value to it. But I also wanted to mention that if you do require any sort of assistance with budgeting, or taking a look at your personal financial situation, or you need any sort of assistance with some, you know, repaying debts or dealing with creditors, you know, use us. You can use me. I'm available. There's a toll-free number down there. There's our website. You can inquire on there as well, and the inquiry goes to a gentleman in Ottawa. And, you know, there's a lot of resources on the website. And you guys, or members rather, if there's any members on here, you know, they have access to loans and grants as well. So if anybody's in a very tough, distressed situation, there's loans and grants that are available. There's also a self-improvement loan, and that's up to $5,000. That can help with distressed situations, pay off some smaller debt, but you can also use it to start, you know, a home-based business or things like that. So if it's going to help you out, you know, we can definitely look at that. And basically, the approval for that is if you can afford it. The distress program, it's a little more in depth, but again, information's on our website. Or if you have specific questions, I'm going to pass, or I'll put it in the chat. My email address. You can always email me. We have a question from Kim.
And looks like, hold on, I'm trying to pull down there. I have a question regarding your services. With the monthly fees we are paying, so I take it, Kim, you use SISIP. Correct me if I am wrong, but I think it includes the taxes done for the member and additional fees for spouse. This year I haven't worked. Do I still need to get my taxes done? If you haven't worked, do you still need to get your taxes done?
Well, I mean, technically you don't need to file taxes unless you owe money. I think it would still be a good idea. I'm not sure if you get any sort of child tax benefits or anything like that. But if you have zero income, you may want to apply because you might be eligible for some tax credits, you know. But as far as you legally having to do it, you don't actually have to file. But I think it's a good idea to still file, just in case there's some benefits you might be able to claim on there.
And part of that question as well was, I know this because I just took advantage of it, but with your SISIP registration and monthly payment, your member does get free tax return available. And then, Corey, I believe it was $40 for a spouse to have their tax return done then? That's great. Yep. And then Barb also had a question as well.
You would want to, this is just to finish Kim's, you would probably, the representative or planner that does your taxes at SISIP, you'd want to ask them that question. I'm not really a tax specialist. He'd be able to do the numbers and see if it's better for you, to file or not, or how to file. So definitely contact their planner that handles your taxes, Kim, and ask them that specific question. They'll be able to help you out.
Okay. And then Barb?
Mike, two questions. One, and it's specific, I guess, to me. I don't know who else this would apply to, but I'm an NPF staff person working for MFS down here in Colorado Springs. Is SISIP available to me, or is it just for the members?
It's for members and spouses. Are you ex-military?
No.
Okay. Are you a military spouse?
No. I'm a civilian working for MFS, Military Family Services.
No, at least the SISIP is for members and their spouses.
Okay.
So other CFMWS employees couldn't take advantage of SISIP, correct, Corey?
No, not the specific programs that are available.
Okay.
There are still resources online or the website that you can take advantage of, but yeah, unfortunately, the specific loans and grants and things like that are for members.
Okay, and the second question was, Is there anyone in, I know you certainly offer assistance, but is there anyone in the SISIP world, anywhere in Canada, that actually, that specializes or has a lot of the, I guess, answers for outcan folks who have maybe, you know, it's a bit different than being in Canada. You've got the U.S., Canadian tax world. You might maybe have some people working down here. I mean, there's some nuances that we often get the line, well, we don't really know that much about the U.S., or in the case of Europe, it could be the same thing. But so I'm just wondering if there's anybody who specializes in the international components of financial management that would apply to our families that are either in the States or Europe.
There are, depending on the area, there are specific representatives that assist with the outcan members, and probably the easiest and quickest way to reach them is to log onto our website and fire off a web inquiry, and that'll go to our manager in Ottawa, and he'll direct it to the appropriate party, depending on the location of the request. So yes, there are specific representatives that, you know, deal with members that are placed outside of Canada.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. That's a great question as well.
Anybody else have any questions for Corey? Go ahead. Oh yeah, Barb, go ahead.
Sorry, just what is the name of that manager in Ottawa?
It's Ron Ashworth.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
And it's really dependent on the region, the members in. That's why it doesn't make sense for me to list off because it kind of depends on where you're at, who you'll get directed to. But yeah, that web inquiry is great because they get it to the appropriate person right away.
Looks like that's all the questions, Corey.
Okay. Well, thank you again for inviting me and having me here. I had a lot of fun today, and I hope everybody enjoyed the information. And if anybody, if there's any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out through me via Joanna. But yeah, you know, definitely use the resources that are available to you, and definitely use SISIP, right, if it's applicable to you.
All right, well, thank you, everybody, for attending our first SISIP virtual program today. We're hoping to bring them back for further discussions on best tax practices and retirement, RRSPs, all of that information. So we really appreciate Corey's time today. A reminder, I will be following up with the budget spreadsheet. I'll forward to each of you who attended today, and I'll be doing a little research to see if we can get some of those names and contact numbers for international SISIP reps. So, and if I can get that quickly, I'll get that out in the email with that budget spreadsheet to each of you. So thank you all for joining. I hope you enjoyed the session today, and we look forward to seeing you on virtual programs later down the road. If you would like to exit the session, all you have to do is close your browser window. So that's the red X up in the upper right-hand corner if you're on a PC, and the little red dot in the upper left-hand corner if you're on a Mac. So thank you all.
Thanks.